Excellent. Thank you so much. We're so delighted to be here. And before we dive into the deck, I'd like my colleagues to just say a quick hello so you get to know them.
Yes. Hi, everyone. I'm Melissa Murtaugh. I'm an account manager at Matter.
And I'm Alexis Feinberg. I am a senior account executive at Matter.
And I'm Claire Papanastasiou. I'm a director at Matter, and Matter is a national brand elevation agency. We have around 200 professionals nationwide. We're based in Massachusetts. Started in 2003 as a PR agency, but as the media landscape evolved, so did we. And I just saw some kitties. And so did we. And now we're a full service agency. So in addition to PR, which is our bread and butter, we do video, creative, digital marketing, content creation, internal communications, just a full stop agency in terms of communications. So let's dive in. Next slide, please. Thank you. So PR and the new normal. What we'd like to do is have an overview of PR even before COVID, because some principles do apply, okay? So we get this question a lot, what is public relations? We also get another question a lot, which I'm gonna pose right here because it answers this question. What is the difference between public relations and marketing? We get that a lot. And here are some of the similarities, and then I'll get into the differences. Number one, like marketing, we work PR, media relations teams work very closely with the leadership of a company. We create our PR strategy around a business strategy. It has to have a business goal. We don't do PR just for PR and ego. It has to align carefully with the business strategy and goals. Marketing does the same thing. So the difference, though, is marketers, marketing people, business development people, they are client facing. They are working with salespeople. They are working with partners at law firms in going and getting the business. So they're really right with the clients. Okay, difference between marketing and PR is we have our clients too, businesses across all industries, but we also have another client, and that's the media. And that's where, because we're continually working with them, building relations, and it's important to a business enterprise that really values marketing and communications and PR. It's important to get that earned media. It's that third-party validation. It's that article that just sings your praises because you actually have something to say and is relevant in today's world. So that's where PR, and I find throughout the years, in my many years in PR, companies that really value communications and have professional PR people or communications people at the table with leadership, working hand in hand, those are how you're going to get the best compelling stories. So the reason why we do public relations is to get those articles, to raise the awareness of an enterprise, get that interest. And it comes from actually the media that actually we target, which gets before the audiences that our businesses want. So it's that, your target clients, your prospects, they're reading about you in the press. Okay, great. And PR is the gift that keeps on giving, in a sense that once the article's placed, you leverage it. You leverage it on your social channels. You have your, maybe your salespeople send the article to a prospect. It's the constant conveyor belt of coverage that keeps on going, and we pass it off to marketing and the enterprise to just continue to leverage. So that's how you can really generate and maintain a positive buzz. So that's, hopefully I addressed what PR is. And so now we're going to get into some other basics in terms of PR, and I'm going to pass it off to Alexis to talk about telling that compelling story.
Thank you, Claire. So I am going to take us a little bit through two ways to tell a compelling story using PR. So the first is going to be pitching directly to the media. And when I say pitch, it is a way to convey your story. And then the second part is going to be through thought leadership, which is tied into pitching the media as well. So the question that we're asking here is, how do you tell a compelling story? And certainly it starts with crafting a pitch to your media targets. The media targets are going to depend on what your industry is, who your audience is, what your goals are as far as reaching out to the media. So when you're thinking about those, you want to ask yourself, is it relevant? Is what the story you're telling and the information you're sharing with them, is it relevant to that journalist's coverage area? And if the answer to that is yes, then you can go into writing that pitch. So I just want to go through a couple of quick do's and don'ts for creating a great pitch. So we'll start with the do's. And so a couple of things to keep in mind is just to make sure that what you're writing and the story that you're telling is short and punchy. So what that means is you want to get to the point quickly, and you want to also be clear about what you're asking the journalist to do. Are you asking them to interview a leader at the company? Are you asking them to try out a product? So you want to make sure that that ask is very clear. And then you also want to think about the tone, because you don't want it to have all this marketing speak or even jargon related to your product or service. I would say think about talking to a close colleague at work, where the tone is going to have some formality to it, but it's going to be a little bit more on the casual side. So I wouldn't go as far to say it's like talking to a friend, but I would say you want it to be casual. And another thing to keep in mind is that you also want to make sure that as you are keeping it short and punchy, that you are still telling a good story. So getting into some of the don'ts, which are certainly similar to some of the do's, my top don'ts, although this is a longer list, is going to be, again, when you are researching the journalist that you want to reach out to, just make sure that what you're sending to them isn't totally out of their coverage. Because when you are pitching them, your goal is to also create relationships with them. So hopefully that there'll be a little bit more continuous coverage with this one reporter. And again, don't use too much marketing jargon, particularly if you are sending them a press release or product information. Don't just copy and paste from that, because they can read it off of those documents. You want to make sure that what you're sending to them is telling that story behind the information. And so looking at some of these items that you can send to media, we have a press release, a media alert, and then a proactive pitch, which is what we just talked through a little bit. So what is the difference? When you're looking at a press release, you want to make sure that whatever you are putting into a press release is newsworthy, whether it's a new product, it's a new person in leadership, but you just want to make sure that it has all the information a reporter needs to learn about the news, and then any relevant links that would be helpful for them to have. And you can also provide a little bit of context through storytelling. I wouldn't say it's a story that's several paragraphs, but you want to provide some context to the information. And then a media alert is going to be short and to the point. So it's often used with events where you just put the details of the event and inviting the journalist to attend or whatever your ask is. And again, with a proactive pitch, it's a really great way to customize the story to the journalist, and you can make the angle of it very narrow. So when we're thinking about pitching for thought leadership, these programs are designed to augment the profiles of individual leaders. So what that means is you use thought leadership to promote the company's vision through the leaders at your company. Even if it's just you and you're the one who's running everything at your company, this still applies to you. And it's a way to show their perspective on what's happening in your industry. So just a couple of questions you want to ask yourself here on the bottom before you go ahead and start pitching thought leadership is, why now? What's the impact? And what's the connection? And if you're able to answer these questions well, then you're ready to pitch thought leadership profile or a thought leadership story. So the next step, which Claire mentioned a little bit earlier, is how once a reporter or journalist covers your story, how can you use that beyond just the coverage? So you can use it in a couple of different ways. You can use it to build more awareness about your company. You can boost other areas such as sales, recruitment, as well as share it with investors or board members if it applies. It can also be used in other marketing channels such as blogs, newsletters, and of course on social media. So that was just a really quick overview of pitching to the media and how you can get your story out there. So next we're going to get into what the new normal of PR looks like.
The new normal.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks, Alexis. So everything Claire and Alexis just went through with you is, what we do at Matter on the PR team on a day-to-day basis. But insert 2020 and things have definitely shifted, and we really had to pivot what we do with our clients. So we put together some things to keep in mind. Alexis, if you want to go to the next slide, on how rules have changed. So because of COVID, the way businesses have had to approach, media relations and getting their story out is different. The more transparent and authentic leadership can be, the better. If you have something appropriate to say, you don't want to go out to the media if you don't have anything relevant to say or you think it could be controversial. So if we go into the next slide, we kind of have our rules on when is appropriate during these new normal times to go out to the media. Oh, Alexis, next slide.
Yeah.
Oh.
Actually, to pick up on what Melissa's saying in terms of it definitely changed the landscape in terms of going out to the media, external communications. And looping back to what we said earlier about, can we go back to the internal communications slide again? The takeaway. I just want to set it up for a minute. So picking up on what Melissa said on external communications and the changes of COVID. Before COVID, businesses, the ones that really understood and appreciated communications and comprehensive communications plan had it. They had a comprehensive communications plan that had internal communications, external communications, and then crisis communications, right? So this is before COVID. And a lot of companies, though, had looked at communications as just nice to have or just pull on them just to get some news out there or manage a crisis. COVID changed that, as Melissa said, just totally changed that, where every entity had to look internally because COVID really is still very much a health issue. So it affects our people. So companies that had a structure already in terms of the communications protocol, internal, external, and crisis, weathered it better than companies that really didn't have a comprehensive communications program. So the shift turned into internal. And that's a good thing, actually. That's really part of a solid communications plan. Ideally, internal and external communications teams work together with leadership, and we always get the lead from leadership. Most importantly, though, and this is the most fulfilling part of communications, is that communications is a sounding board to leadership, and they work together, especially during times like COVID. So internally, it made an impact, and for the better. So I'm going to pass it off on how externally, how it plays out in the new normal.
Yes, thanks, Claire. So as we're going to, this past, year up until this point and even moving forward, these are 5 big things we've considered with our clients and how externally, when is it appropriate during this new normal to tell your story outside of your company. So the first thing is to think critically about how to tell your story. When is appropriate? For instance, not COVID related, but, last night there was, the presidential debate. So that's what a lot of news companies and outlets are talking about today. So today might not be the best time to send out a press release about a new product you're launching. And, you know, if you're working with an agency, they would instruct you on finding that appropriate time. You know, this week probably isn't a good time to put out a big piece of news. Let's wait till next week so things have settled down. Exactly how it was, you know, with COVID. When things really hit in March, you know, as Claire said, we told our clients to focus on that internal communications, get that in a good place. And then, you know, come April and May, once, you know, the different phases have started to open, then, okay, now is a good time to start being back up, you know, new product announcements or service announcements and so forth. And whenever you go out externally, you want to make sure the messages you're sharing externally is cohesive and consistent with those internal messages that you already have in place. The next point, I kind of already touched upon this, know the news cycle. So again, knowing when is appropriate to go out. If something big like the debate is going on, you're not going to want to launch something or put out an important statement. You want to wait until that, you know, news has settled and things open back up a bit and people are starting to cover other things outside of COVID and outside of, you know, the election. You also want to make sure you're targeting the right journalists and right producers if you're looking for broadcast coverage. And how you do that is take a look at, you know, what they've written in the past. You know, if you are a local bakery, you want to reach out to a lifestyle reporter or somebody who covers food. You don't want to reach out to somebody who's covering, you know, health-related topics about COVID, for example. Also, this past year, one thing, you know, that's sad for us from the PR marketing side is resources are limited. You know, a lot of people have been laid off, and, you know, a lot of reporters and producers and news staff has been cut down, and people are wearing a lot of hats. You might send a pitch out, like Alexis talked you through how putting together an appropriate pitch. You might put your pitch together. You're really excited. You send it out, and it's a few days and you haven't heard anything, and you follow up again and it's a week and you don't hear anything. And then, you know, maybe 2 weeks later, that reporter or that producer responds and says, so sorry, I've been so busy, but we're very interested in seeing and learning more about your product or service. Can we set up an interview? So don't get discouraged if it takes a while for someone to get back to you, just because people are spread very thin and they're very swamped this year. And then last but not least, just focusing on the fundamentals. Make sure messaging, branding, content, you have everything ready to go before you are reaching out to the media. And it's okay to look to the long term. If you think, you know, we still have a few more months before we're ready to go out with anything, we're not sure how a new product is going to fare in 2020. We're waiting till, you know, 2021 to announce something. That's totally fine. Plan to the long term, focus on your internal communication, get all your ducks and messaging in a row. And then when you're ready to share things externally, then you'll be all set to do so. Next slide, please, Alexis. And then something else we wanted to highlight on going along with COVID is communicating during controversial times. So another thing, you know, amidst COVID, it's been Black Lives Matter and how we coach our clients on communicating about this internally and externally. So we've kind of just put out some questions that we talk through with our clients. And for you, you know, small businesses, if you're thinking about, you know, sharing your message during these controversial times, things to keep in mind before you do so. So do you have a connection to the issue at hand? Do you have anything meaningful to add to the conversation? You don't want to just put a message out there just because you feel the need to, because everybody's talking about it and we should have a say. If you don't have something meaningful to add to the conversation, it's totally fine. You're better off to just stay silent about it and not comment on the issue. That's totally fine. We've had a lot of clients take this approach, especially with social media, where that just seems to, everything takes over and you want to join in on the conversation, but you make sure you take a step back and think, how is this going to impact my business? How's it going to impact my customers? Does it make sense to insert our opinion on this topic? if you do decide it is right for you to jump in on a controversial topic, figuring out when and how often you're going to interject your thoughts. What have you done in the past that might have worked well? What hasn't worked? Take a look at your competitors, see what they're doing. If they do something and you're like, nope, that's too much, might not be a good idea, that's fine. Just sit back and you don't have to say anything. And yeah, lastly, how should we communicate it publicly if we want to do it via social media? Is it a press release? Is it a statement? As Alexa said, there are many different vehicles to communicate your story and your message. In your opinion, but going back to what Claire said, it all starts internally and making sure you have your message succinct so then you're ready to share it externally with the public.